This will be the Ikea Hemnes cabinet. It's a, I don't know, kind of a dining room type thing. This particular installation, you're going to see it installed where it's actually mounted to the wall, but it's also standing on its own feet. And a couple other things you'll see here now that it's done, but in the following segments you'll see the assembly process. Of course, we have a lot of shelves here. I've installed all of the shelves that came with it. What some people do is they don't necessarily install all of the shelves. This middle one, though, is structural. So once that's in there, more or less permanently, it doesn't go anywhere. The others, of course, can be moved around and adjusted as you want. So, on to the assembly process on this Ikea Hemnes glass front cabinet. So this is the Ikea Hemnes, and of course we've seen a little bit at the start of the video. A few segments of this are going to have better clarity than others because I'm switching cameras throughout this. But here we have everything unpacked and against the wall. Now normally we like to do the assembly of these on a carpeted surface. Fortunately, there's a table here with a soft surface that I can work with this on. And so we'll get started. Okay, so when you see a mix of large holes and small holes on something like this, usually at a corner, we're going to be using the turn lock, and then we also use pegs at that point, as we can see here. Where things get a little tricky is when we're looking on this part here, because some of these pegs are for the shelf adjustments, but a couple of them are for a structural shelf, which usually is going to go toward the middle, as we can see here. The subtle part in the instructions is they have little dots which show where the holes are. So what we're looking for is holes which are alone without any other holes near them, and which would be level, with something that's roughly in the middle, but not exactly where the other reinforcement would be. And those will get additional turnbuckle, or I don't know, whatever you call these things, additional little reinforcements. So we start those by hand, and then I finish them up with an impact drill. Now, one of the things about finishing them up with an impact, it's got to be really light on the trigger. If you have one of the smaller ones, like the little Bosch 10 volt or 12 volt, those are fine. Okay, I'm using the big Ryobi because I've bought this thing new a year ago. I'm very familiar with the trigger, and I know how to be really light on the trigger when I'm using it. So we set all these very carefully by hand, just kind of pushing them and turning them, and then I'll finish them with a drill just to the point that they bottom out onto the little flange there, and we'll take this off and do the other one. What we're going to do is I divert from the instructions just a little bit. Is at this point I might as well also put in some of the side pegs. Basically, if it's a slightly smaller hole, it gets one of these things because it threads in. A slightly larger hole, it gets a peg. If you can push the peg in where it bottoms out by hand, go ahead. If the rubber mallet, I'm using very light hits. Now, I actually own two of these. One is black, one is white rubber. When you have the furniture in different colors, you kind of want to match the color of the mallet to the color of the furniture. That way, if it bumps up on it and it rubs some of that rubber off, it's the same color, okay? So I would bring the black mallet in from the darker colored furniture and kind of the white mallet in for the lighter colored furniture. But the other thing is the lighter colored mallet is a softer rubber. So if there's any doubt, and you're only going to own one of the mallets, so get the lighter colored, softer rubber one. So this one's ready to go. We'll do the other one. One small mistake that I made, I was busy talking and not busy reading. These, and it's typical for these, I should have recognized it. These use the short ones. Okay, whenever it's in kind of the middle of the shelf, expect to use the shorter of the little turn locks. The longer ones go in the end. Now they're threaded exactly the same and they go in the exact same size hole. So if you do make a mistake and put the wrong one in the wrong place, just very carefully unscrew it and screw the other one in, and it will go into the threads that the wrong one had cut because they use the same thread pitch on those. So retrofitting that to this one was easy, quick. They're still nice and firm. Again, because I'm not really torquing that impact down a whole lot on it. And if you use a lower powered impact driver, that's fine. I compensate for that with this one by being really light on the trigger. We're going to put some little leg reinforcements on here. The other purpose these serve is they serve as a base for the little adjustable feet, which we can put in at this point too. Now, normally if I'm doing a whole lot of Ikea furniture and I have to do some hex head, usually this is like 4 or 5 millimeter, I'll go and get an adapter for the impact driver so I can just shoot these down in a hurry. On a situation like this where it's only one piece of furniture and there's just not a whole lot of these to work with, I'm just going to use little hand wrenches included. It's almost faster than, you know, it's not faster than using the proper tool for this, but in being a proper tool from Ikea, it's barely worth my trouble to go fish that out of the truck. But if you're doing a whole bunch of stuff, yeah, you need to go get the hex adapter for your impact. The other thing I'll do is I'll screw this in so that these are ready to contact the other holes before I get it in. Otherwise, when I go to screw it in, it's kind of like pushing one away from the other. One of these already tight, you know, you can speed do this if you're not trying to hold a camera with one hand. We just tighten that down and, you know, it's good to go. The other thing is about doing it by hand, you run no chance of stripping it out because it's actually threading into a relatively thin part of the material this is made out of. While I have this up on the table, and this is where it helps sometimes to turn a couple pages ahead in the instructions. If you have a table to work with, that's wonderful. And but you might as well get all of the pieces on one before you go and set it to the side. So rather than switch pieces to perfectly match instructions, I'm going to do everything that's associated with one side at once that, you know, makes sense to do. So these are the little hinge bases, and on the next page up we see where the positioning is, which is when we have two holes together. Okay, so you'll see there we've got two holes together. There we have two holes together. We have that group of 5 holes, or 4 or 5 holes. That's where shelves go. Now, these have a little plastic base where it's adjustable a little bit up and down, but when they come from the factory, they center it. And your best bet when you go to put this together is just put it together centered. Okay, just do it centered, and you should be good to go. That's the way I'd recommend doing it. And they come with the screws already partially set, so it's just a matter of kind of holding it up there firmly, setting them on there. They'll go in, and then of course follow up with the impact driver. And this is where it really helps to have a power tool, not just a hand screwdriver. And take a little force to spread out those little lock things, those little plastic lock things. This is kind of where you want to use an impact driver on it. Things start to get a little tricky. We're going to have some cross pieces that look like this, okay? But when you look a little more carefully, you're going to notice some are longer than others. Well, the shorter ones go where this goes. The longer ones go where this goes. One set has, the longest set is not painted on one side. Now the way this cabinet's made, it's going to have a glass front, right? So that part with the hinges is the front. The part without hinges is the back, and there's going to be a back here. So they went through the trouble of not painting this, so that's going to be part that shows. Now normally if there's an unpainted part, it's part that goes on the inside, but no, because this is glass, there's going to be a visible and a not visible part. The other thing of course is kind of neat is they show this is made out of real wood, so these pieces are not particle board like you might see with a lot of other Ikea stuff where they actually will do structural parts out of particle. There's a thicker one and a thinner one. It wasn't entirely clear to me in the instructions. I'm putting a thicker one on the bottom. I'm thinking it's better to have the uniformity up top than it is on the bottom. But again, I could be wrong about that, and we're gonna get partway through the build and see what that's done for us, because there's a strong possibility I gotta put the wider one on the top. It's not incredibly clear here, but if the bottom needs to hold a shelf, and I'm going to size check my shelves, If the bottom needs to hold a shelf, then that might tell me a little bit about what's going on too, because of the way some of these holes line up. We're just not sure yet, but I think the wider one goes on the bottom. In this part I use a power stapler instead of little hammer nails or screws or whatever they give on these things, because it's just the best way to deal with these cardboard backs on the Ikea furniture. The backs come in two pieces that fold out, so they're going to look like this and you're going to wonder what's going on. Well, when you fold them out, they have that wood grain, okay? Well, this whole thing's kind of wobbly, warbly. I haven't put in all the turn locks and tightened them down yet. I'll just use a regular Leatherman tool for that. But this thing's going to be wobbly, warbly, want to come out of square when you're putting it together. The best way to hold it in square is with the back pieces, okay? So I carefully put these in. They kind of unfold into the two slots. I draw it up on the bottom because these factory cuts are very square. And then I staple it in. One of the things, if you've previously been doing a little roofing work or something using wider or thick, longer staples on this, you want to switch to the thinner, smaller staples, just so they don't shoot through. I remembered that before getting on this, so there was no problem. Now you end up with that little gap in between the two. Now, fortunately, the way IKEA designed this, that's exactly where the shelf goes. So that's not really going to show. Now, one of the things that's kind of optional is, would you nail or staple these backs at that shelf? And that's kind of a judgment call, okay? Because you could shoot up over the edge or not. I mean, it's a relatively thick shelf that is the structural member there. It's this one right here. It's a judgment call on whether you want to do that. And I'll be asking the owner of this whether or not he wants that done. If he does, it's no extra charge, it's just a few staples. And what that will do is kind of firm things up a little bit more on the way this goes. So at this stage, with it laying sideways, we kind of confirm square on everything. We realize it's not super secure. But we start popping all of these things in. There's a little open side. This is a really complex part right here. I mean, this is like, 3D design. This is part of, really complex stuff. So we put the open end facing where that little stud was sticking up. We take that in there. And then if we're tightening everything down, it's still righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. I mean, it's a way that whole little cam lock type situation works. It's still righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a bunch of these things. Should be 8 total. And we're going to set them in, and then I'll just run around with a Leatherman tool, screwdriver. We do not use a power tool on this. Some really slick guys can do it with impact by just being really, really careful and light on the trigger. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to just do them with the Leatherman tool and call it happy. And we'll go on to the next stage off camera. The top really structurally holds this together, and top's real wood on this particular piece. So there's 2 dowels, one here, one here. It's going to get you all lined up. You got 2 screws at the front, 1 at the rear. So as far as this goes. And this is also going to be another one where I'm a little hesitant on the power tool, but if you're doing more than one, it's worth your time to go and get that fitting for the impact driver. Right now, though, I've got the advantage of doing this on a tabletop instead of squatting down to do it. I might as well just do these with the hand tool that's included. Just remember to get a little press so that the holes engage. And of course, if you're not holding the camera with one hand, you can go a lot faster. I just had to do in putting this together. It just wasn't very secure. And, setting this up where it covers that line. So what I did was I put a staple line along here. And that seemed to square and firm things up better. And the thing to be really careful is to get really close to that line, so that none of those staples will bump through up on the wood. But fortunately, this is wood, not particle board, and you're going to have less chance of that kind of damage happening. Apart from that, of course, we got the top on. We got this down. I'm putting the little shelf studs in, and then we'll work on the doors next. Put on that staple issue that this furniture is going to come with. These little things, the little barb and screw things. That's what would go in some of these holes, and you know, that's kind of their thing for helping you avoid needing to buy a power stapler, and it's just not as good. It's not going to make this stuff as secure as stapling it. It's a little bit less permanent if you need to take this out and change it, but there's, on the center, stuff can really go wrong on that. On these ends, where they have these pre-done holes, it's not bad, but it's not as good as stapling this stuff. And if you look at commercially made furniture, you know, like kitchen cabinets at Home Depot and all that, anything that has cardboard backs, they staple them on. So we're skipping that part in this build just because I invested in a pretty expensive tool and staples to do that better than the factory recommended method. The shell's angled in. We've got all that. Again, I set them on the middle settings whenever there was 5. On this one, there was only 4 notches. So or was it this one? Yeah. It was only 4 notches, so I go 2 notches down, and it seemed to give me the even shelf spacing. But again, if you want different shelf spacing on that, you can do it. It's not going to be too much of a problem. What a lot of people like to do is, you know, a wider section, or even take a shelf all the way out, depending on what you have on display in your glass cabinet. These things are a little tricky. That's one reason I didn't do them on video. But these are the door stops, and they might be best done before you put everything else together. Those were a little tricky. So next are the doors, and you know, very similar to putting the hinge side on, these things are already set in the position. So you just kind of set these in, we push them in and tighten them down. And this you really want to use a power tool on. Fortunately, I have a table to work with here, and we're going to be fine with that. We just got to make sure that in all the other work we were doing, we didn't leave anything sharp or hard out where it could cut into the finish of the stuff that we're working on. So we just want to make sure it's a clean, soft surface that we're working with on this, so we don't damage the finish on the wood. Notice these hinges are slightly different from each other. There's actually 2 different styles. There's one without the little shock absorber type thing on there, and one with. What it is, or actually there's 4 with it, and the ones with it go on the outer edges. The one without goes on the inner edges. I think that was just a design decision from Ikea as far as the aesthetics of it. And so this door is ready to mount. The knobs we're not going to put on until it's up there. Okay, so here we are all done. Now, part of what we're dealing with is the floor isn't necessarily level to the wall, but the wall is perfectly plumb. So when I screw this to the wall, we're using these little brackets and kind of being careful to set those. And what I use as a guide for that is the gap up here to make sure this all comes in even, because it's possible to warble this out of square when we're doing that. And then after I did that, after I pushed this against the wall and set our gap uniform, because we've got a little trim here, but see, these pieces are adjustable. So, you know, you can adjust that so that as far as your gap on the wall goes, it's relatively even. We're actually out from the wall a little bit. I just didn't want to go beyond my ability to adjust these little feet down here. See how you can adjust these things to kind of level all of this out, and you want to play with that before you play with the hinge adjustment, because the hinge adjustment's back here, really hard to get at. So, you know, we want to level the piece of furniture before we mess with any of that. And even then, the problem with adjusting the hinge is I don't want my gap here to go non-uniform, and I really like the fact these come in at about the same spot. So we got a little bit of rub when we close that door, but not bad. And because this is real wood, I don't think that's ever going to be a problem. And the other thing with that bolt to the wall, we're very secure. I mean, it's a piece of furniture, but it's like installed cabinetry, which looks pretty good in this setting.